for those people whom you love. And so I think this is a message that can be generalized for all of us. And it happens not infrequently that I think we get tired in our service. We get tired. We get tired of always being the good guy. We get tired of being patient. We get tired of outreaching people. We get tired. And sometimes we just want to toss the towel in because we're tired. Whether this is in formal ministry and Sunday school or youth ministry, and you're outreaching somebody and outreaching them and you see no fruit from that at all, and you just want to give up, or if it's of just trying to be a loving presence at home, or with friends at school or colleagues at work, and you feel like you're kind to people and they just continue being poisonous back to you. In any of those circumstances, or others that you can imagine yourselves, sometimes we just get tired. And if you open up now to Numbers 11, Numbers is sort of the fourth book in the Bible, and Numbers 11, and sort of like kind of the second quarter of the chapter. So I just kind of remember it as Numbers 11:11, makes it easier for me to remember. It's roughly that. So what happens, what's the context here is Moses has brought the people out of Egypt by God's power and his strength, and they're in the desert, and the people who are hungry, and they get the manna from heaven, and they start remembering Egypt, and somehow they remember. It's really funny. Like I think it's actually quite funny, right? Somehow they remember funny things. They remember Numbers 11 verse 5, we remember the fish which we used to eat freely in Egypt, and cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic. And now our whole being is dried up, and there is nothing except this manna before our eyes. What part of me, remind me, when did you exactly get to eat? You're having this like seafood buffet, like you were slaves in Egypt. If you were cooking fish for anybody, it was for your masters, right? But somehow they have this kind of strange memory, and I think all of us do. I think especially in moments of difficulty and suffering, we remember the good old days, and maybe our memory is a little bit selective. They don't remember a single lashing that they got as slaves, but they remember the fish and the leeks and the garlic and the onions and the melons, and oh my goodness, the whole festival, is happening in their memory, right? But they were slaves being tortured and tormented, right? But in any event, that's what they remember, and that's also our reality sometimes, right? And so God doesn't correct their memory. Like, I'm the one who's being sarcastic and sort of, tongue-in-cheek, poking fun at their memory, but God doesn't. You'll notice in the passage. So that's the first thing that God feels you. He sympathizes with you. He knows how you feel. He knows how you feel, and he knows that in this moment in particular, you're tired. And maybe not in maybe in a physical sense, but maybe in an emotional sense or a psychological sense, more so than a physical sense. But in any event, and he knows that in our tiredness we become vulnerable, right? And we don't have the psychological tenacity to hear these thoughts in our heads and say, oh, the fish, and say, what fish? Are you crazy, John? They were beating you silly when you were in Egypt, and they gave you quotas of bricks to make, and if you didn't make Then they increase the quota rather than giving you help. And don't you remember how difficult it was? We don't have that psychological, fortitude to answer these thoughts as we ought, with logic or just historical truth, God knows that. And you'll notice God nowhere along the line reprimands them, right? But these people go crying to Moses, and then Moses can't take it anymore. He just can't take it anymore. So who does he go to? He turns to God, right? And in my Bible, for the benefit of the people who are watching this, I've written here next to Numbers 11, right? Here, I don't know, you can see here in the margin, I've written the prayer of a tired servant of God. And I put a big star next to it. You're going to need to read this again, John, right? And I turn to this every time I'm feeling tired. Every time I'm feeling tired. So we'll read together Numbers 11 to 15. This is Moses' prayer. So Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you afflicted your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I beget them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a guardian carries a nursing child to the land which you swore to their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give to all of these people? For they weep all over me, saying, 'Give us meat that we may eat.' I am not able to bear all these people alone because of the burden of these people, because the burden is too heavy for me. If you treat me like this," I love Moses in this moment because he's so dramatic, and I can be dramatic like this too. "If you treat me like this, please kill me here and now," right? "If I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness." I'm laughing because this is me in all the drama. "Oh Lord, just kill me now. Let the earth open and swallow me up," right? And various other things, right? And God just looks at us and says, there. There, easy, take it easy. The way the story ends is God tells Moses, "Look, you need help, and let us set some elders over you, over the people, so that you don't have to judge every single case that would come your way, and so on, and this and that." And he says, "I'm going to give them meat to eat. I'm going to give them so much meat to eat. I'm going to give them so much meat to eat for a whole month. It's going to be coming out of their nostrils. They're going to be so fed up of meat," and so on. So that's kind of how the story ends, so that you know. But the point here is maybe we can find some patterns of prayer for ourselves, for those moments in which we ourselves are completely exhausted, completely worn out. And he says, "I am not able to bear all these people alone because the burden is too heavy for me," right? And maybe we say that sometimes too, say, "I can't do this anymore. This is just too much for me to do anymore, or I can't do this alone anymore. I really need help," right? Do you notice anything about Moses' prayer?
Why me?
Why me? Great. I love what he says, you know, I never knew that this was a phrase that could be said in English. Like, I know it in Arabic, you know, did I beget them? There's a phrase, an expression in Arabic, وَأَنَا خَلِّفْتُهُمْ وَنْسِتْهُمْ, like that I give birth to them. It rhymes in Arabic, so it's, you know, kind of humorous, like, but like, did I beget them and forget them? Basically, that kind of rhymes in English too. But right, you know, like, saying like, they're not. Is this? How did this become my responsibility? How did this end up in my inbox? He's saying, you know. Let's look at the very beginning of his prayer. So Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you afflicted your servant?" Now he might be saying this as an expression. He might be saying it as a matter of speech. But the point is here is that if I could get three volunteers to help me. You're not gonna have to say anything. I'm just gonna move you around. Yeah. Okay.
The willingness.
So one person over Jamal over here. Rachel. And Rachel over here, and Marina. Right? Over here. Okay. So who's gonna be God? Jamal. Okay. Who's gonna be Moses? And somebody's going to be the people of Israel. The problem. Marina's the problem. Rachel. So usually, you know, like Moses brings his problem to God, right? Usually that's the way it works, right? But now, if you notice, the problem, it's going to become your nickname for the next couple of weeks. The problem, right, is an obstacle between Moses and God. Moses is having a beef with God. He's having a fight with God. Why have you afflicted me, right, by giving me the problem, right? Big hand of applause for. We're going to need you again. Don't forget who you were, right? Right? But he says, why have you afflicted your servant? Right? And he sees here, whether he's really like, you know, blaming God, or it's just an expression, nonetheless, it's no longer me and God serving the people. It's, I have to serve these people, you've dumped this on me. You know, it's kind of like when a colleague at work like dumps their work on you, and he's saying like they're not my people, they're your people. How do they become my people? How did this happen? When along the line did this happen, right? And so Moses is upset with God. He's upset with God because the people have become his problem. I know it sounds like I'm stating the obvious, right? But when we do that, necessarily what happens? We've inserted something between us and God. So what happens? God is not petty. God doesn't get angry or upset with us or whatever. What happens is we lose the comfort of his intimacy, which is probably the strength that allows us to go on. God didn't go nowhere. God is right here. God hasn't traveled. God isn't on holiday. I love the passage, the contest on Mount Carmel with Elijah. It's hilarious if you read between the lines of what Elijah's actually saying. He tells the priests of Baal, maybe he can't hear you. Maybe your God can't hear you. Maybe you should speak louder. So they start screaming and jumping up and down. They start cutting themselves. He says, maybe he's indisposed. That's the biblical terminology for he's like in the washroom. You know? God has been doing maybe your God is constipated. He's been in there for a while. He can't seem to hear you. Right? It's hilarious what he says, right? No, all of this sounds so ridiculous, right? No, God is here. God is with you. And so if if at a certain sense, a certain time, I lose the comfort and the joy that I get from loving others, from serving others, from being with others, something has come. The comfort and the joy comes from God, and it comes from specifically intimacy with Him. Sometimes the very thing which is supposed to be a channel or a conduit of my living out the gospel and thus enjoying intimacy with God more actually becomes something that insulates me from my intimacy with God. And then I lose my joy, I lose my comfort, I lose my hope. I don't see trials and tribulations as suspenseful, exciting. How's God going to get us out of this one? You know? Right? Like Daniel in the lion's den, the person who is close to God and full of intimacy thinks to themselves, this can only end well, right? Either the lions tear me to shreds in seconds and I'm in paradise with my Savior, who could want better than that, right? Rather than be like tortured through the trials of life for another 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. Or God does a miracle, whatever it may be, makes the lions disappear, teleports me somewhere else, etc. I have no idea. Really, this can only end great, right? But most of us, when we're in the lion's den, that's not how at least me, that's not how I'm thinking. I'm like, oh no, and this is the last thing I needed, and like my whole life is like out of the frying pan and into the fire, like things just get worse, nothing ever gets better, all right? And all of that, right? But why? But why? But why not be filled with hope? And why not be filled with faith? You're a very loving and hopeful and faithful people, I'm certain. And I'm certain that it's not for a lack of these things being in our lives to begin with. I think the real reason is just that we lose our intimacy with God because we stick other things in between us and God. If you notice Jesus in Matthew 12 and in all the Gospels, you know, he says, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. Every city or house divided against itself cannot stand. Right? Every moment of every day, anytime you find yourself having lost your joy, joy is like the litmus test of intimacy with God. Joy here, maybe it's useful for us to just briefly define it. Joy is not happiness. I'm not anti-happiness, by the way. If we're like, Lord, please give me joy and happiness. I'd be very glad to have both, right? But joy is the quiet, peaceful acceptance of all things that happen in my life, knowing that God is in control. Knowing that they're either by God's permission or they're by God's direct doing, but in any event, God is going to get the last word with this, right? Happiness is happiness. Happiness is happiness. And who doesn't like to be happy? I like to be happy. You know, I don't know, happiness in my mind is, you know, backyard barbecue and there's food and there's music and everybody has a drink in their hand, everybody's smiling, people are telling jokes and everybody's having a great time. That's happiness, right? But what if it rains? Right? Are you going to be upset? Well, the barbecue is ruined. Everybody packs up and leaves and goes home. What am I gonna do with this now? You know, and that's the cardinal difference between joy and happiness, is that happiness is an experience we have when the happenings are good. Joy is revealed. Joy can be, you can be joyful when things are going well or when things are going poorly. But when things are going poorly, that's when joy is revealed. Right? It starts pouring rain, everybody leaves, right? And you're cleaning up in the rain, you know, whistling the tune of the music that was playing a while ago to yourself and thinking to yourself, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. What are we going to do with all these leftovers? You know, I'm going to be eating burgers and hot dogs for the next 2 weeks, you know, or just find somebody to give them to or something, right? Oh well, such is life. it rains, I don't have to water the lawn for the next couple of days. That's joy. So joy is revealed. It might have been there all along, but it's revealed in the times of difficulty. Joy is quiet. Joy is, there's a beautiful, beautiful paragraph in The Way of the Ascetics, this tiny little book, beautiful tiny little book by Tito Colliander, The Way of the Ascetics, chapter 19, it's like the second paragraph. And he says something like, joy does not require the bared teeth of laughter to reveal itself, but it is the quiet, gentle acceptance of all things, or something like that. But this idea of like the bared teeth of laughter, I think the bared teeth of laughter are great. Give me some of that, double up on it, sure, be boisterous and happy. But in the absence of that, let us ask ourselves, am I really joyful? Am I content? Am I willing to be content in any and every situation, the way St. Paul describes in Philippians chapter 4, right? If not, Moses here is the house divided against himself, right? Like, he was tight with God, and now the problem has come in between him and God. I love what St. Paul says about himself in 2 Corinthians 4. He says, we are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. All of these problems are happening, and we're still going to keep motoring on. We're still going to, it's not going to stop us, right? And then in 1 Corinthians, he says, chapter 3, he says, for all things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, or the world, or life, or death, or things present, or things to come, all are yours, and you are Christ's, and Christ is God's. So you see here, like, it's kind of the complete opposite mentality of Moses, right? Here he's not only saying, like, God and I are tight, he's saying, and everything else belongs to Christ as well. He has brought all things into himself, and he has sanctified all things, but their sanctification has not yet been revealed. This is the faith of St. Paul. This is why St. Paul was crazy. Like, by anybody's definitions, you would say he's psychotic, like he's actually psychotic. I mean that as a clinical term. He's like living in an alternate reality. He's saying, Jesus has brought you into himself, and so you are holy as Jesus, but has not yet been fully revealed. And it's like day by day, it's being revealed more and more. And that's not his perspective only towards you, but towards all of creation. So St. Paul could look at disasters and say, this is perfect, right? This is excellent, just has not its perfection has not yet been revealed. And I think all of us can maybe relate to that when we look at our own confessions, and we see that, there's a lot of work to do. But at the same time, in Song of Solomon, we hear, the beloved turning and looking to us and saying, you are all pure, my dove, there is no blemish in you. Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 7, right? So somehow God looks at us and sees us as perfect and whole and complete, as holy as Jesus, as holy as Saint Mary. And we look at ourselves and we see like a major gap with that, right? St. Paul didn't allow that gap to discourage him. When God answers Moses a little further in the chapter, he says to him, has the Lord's arm been shortened? Now you shall see whether what I say will happen to you or not. Also in the book of Numbers, one of my favorite verses that I say to myself all the time, Numbers 23:19. And I've written a whole bunch of other verses that say the same thing next to it. This is one I think worth memorizing, because I say it to myself so often. Sometimes I hear the promises of God and I think to myself, really? No. Like I flat out hear the promises of God and say, just no, right? There's something in us that is doubting, or like almost like belligerently willing to just look straight into the eyes of God and tell him, I don't believe you. You know, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Really? I felt it moment several times. No, I just don't think it's true. So this is what I say to myself when I find myself having difficulty believing the promises of God. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Nor a son of man, did I say it correctly? Nor a son of man that he should repent. Has he said, and will he not do? Or has he spoken, and will he not make it good? Behold, I have received the command to bless. No, that's the next verse. Right?
25.
Numbers 23, verse 19. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Has he said, and will he not do? Or has he spoken, and will he not make it good? Look, you and I overpromise and underdeliver. Maybe you don't, I do, right? And it's not out of ill will. I'm not saying this to justify myself. It's like, like you had good intentions, just somehow you didn't get around to actualizing those good intentions. Or you had good intentions, and you had a plan of how you were going to get it done, but some unforeseen thing came up and derailed your plan. Or things ended up costing more in the larger sense. Not necessarily money, but time, effort, energy. Something happened that prevented you from making good on your promise. So maybe the same thing happened to God. I mean, like, he had good intentions. He really did mean to be there for me and, always and never leave me. But, I will, always be with you. And no, it just didn't happen. No, but none of those things apply to him. He doesn't get surprised. He doesn't, run out of resources. He doesn't run out of time. It isn't like, oh, but somebody else came along the way and they needed my help more. So I'm just going to abandon you for a little bit and go help them. No, that doesn't make any sense, right? So all of the reasons why we overpromise and underdeliver, they just don't apply to God, right? And sometimes I need to remind myself of that he doesn't overpromise and underdeliver. It just doesn't apply to him. I absolutely adore the answer of St. Polycarp of Smyrna when he was taken to martyrdom. So when he was taken to martyrdom, he was an old bishop. And the centurion who was taking him to martyrdom told him, look, you're an old man. I can't possibly imagine throwing you to the beasts for them to eat you. Look, just recant your faith, say whatever, and go back to your church and we'll leave you alone. And, just get yourself out of this pickle, and then you go back to doing whatever you want. And St. Polycarp looked at him square in the face. He said to him, I think it's 82 or 86, I can't remember. Anyways, it's immaterial. 82 years I have known him, and he has been good to me. How can I forsake him? Throw me to the beasts. Who of us can say that? Can say every promise in my life God has made me, he has kept. May God give us that faith, the faith that we've inherited. May God make us good, good on it, that we would keep it. But God's answer to Moses is, has the Lord's arm been shortened? Now you shall see whether what I will say to you will happen. And then he tells him, the people whom I am among, Moses tells him, are 600,000 men on foot. Yet you have said, I will give them meat, that they may eat for a whole month. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them to provide meat for them? Or shall the fish of the sea be gathered for them to provide enough for them? And the Lord said to Moses, has the Lord's arm been shortened? Now you shall see whether what I say will happen to you or not. Like sometimes we do the calculation, you know, we add it all up. We set the budget. We talk about, God, this is impossible. This is impossible. Just talking with Mina about this in the car. Sometimes God inspires us to do things in ministry. And the first response we get from people is, this is impossible. You can't possibly do that. We do communion a little bit differently in our parish. The bishops in our area told us just do what each what suits your parish. So without going into details, whatever, we do what we do. The short of the long, I'm not shy to say, I just don't want to waste your time. It allows us to give people communion in their cars. So we made an announcement and said, anybody who wants to pray the liturgy remotely and come and receive communion, you're welcome. Just please register so Abuna knows if he's giving communion to 10 people on the street or like 200. So for the feasts, we had like 250, 300 people in their cars, right? We got, of course, complaints to Toronto Public Health and so on, but we have a great relationship with them, and so they just called us up and told us to, and we warned them that this is going to happen, and so they're like, yeah, so did you have a good Christmas? I'm like, yeah. Did you hear about it? They're like, yeah. Okay, we're good, you know, because they knew, like, we ran everything by them so that they're happy with what we're doing and everything, right? But when we first proposed the idea to, like, our servants, our parish response group equivalent, right? We call them COVID safety officers. Some of them said to Abuna, you're crazy. Like, if we do that, like, all the other churches are closed. We're gonna have like the entire Coptic Church of Toronto, like probably like 150,000 people at our doors. I'm like, no, we're not. We're downtown. Nobody likes driving downtown. Nobody likes coming here. Nobody even knows we exist, you know? And we like it that way, right? And so, at most, you know, we'll have whatever, 50 or 60 people or something, right? We had like, Christmas was 250 and then Theophany was 275 or something. This was last year. The point is that, like, oftentimes we say to ourselves, this is impossible. We could never do this. This is a story I'm embarrassed to tell. Somebody in the earlier part of the pandemic found a grant for $20,000, up to $20,000, to help. It was an emergency food relief COVID response grant. So it was to do food, like to provide emergency food to people who don't otherwise have access to food during the pandemic. So we applied for $20,000 and we got it. And then I said, you know what would be great? At that time, we were caring for about 200 people in another ministry. I said, you know what would be great? Rather than just doing like boxed lunches or something, the month of January tends to be really hard for people who are on a fixed, like on government support in Toronto or in Ontario, because they get their January 1st check on end of December, like December 22nd. They get it before Christmas. So by Christmas, maximum by New Year's, that money is gone. And that's their money for January, right? So they're like struggling to pay January rent, let alone get food. So what if we bought a box of groceries for each one of these people? Well, how much does groceries for a month cost? So, you know, we looked up like some like estimates online, and then we, you know, somebody actually went to the grocery store and bought like a list of groceries and boxed them. And we found that we estimated that it would cost, I can't remember what it was, $250. Then we realized that, well, you can't buy, we wanted to buy people perishables as well as non-perishables, because, you know, getting people, you know, cans and pasta, that's great, but like they shouldn't have to live a whole month on, you know, canned food and pasta. So we said, okay, well, what if we do it twice, once at the beginning of January and once in the middle of the month, so where the second time we just provide the perishables, the produce and the meat and the milk. Okay, people like that idea. It's like doubling the work, but so. And then when we crunch the numbers, we're like, well, 200 people, $250 off, that's $50,000. Where are we gonna get, so again, the servants came back and said, Buna, this is impossible. Like, it's a $20,000 grant, not a $50,000 grant. We should just do less. We don't have to get them groceries for the entire month. So we started thinking, well, what can we do, and this and that. Somebody came up with an idea, said, here's an idea. What if we reach out to the greater public at large and tell them, for every dollar you donate, we'll match it with a dollar from the grant. That will bring us from 20,000 to 40,000. Okay, great, it works. And then we'll go to corporate and we'll ask whatever grocery store we're gonna recommend for people to go to give us a 20% discount, so things will cost us 20% less, so then it'll cost us $40,000 to get groceries for $50,000. Okay, great. Well, the problem with that is we approached so many different grocery stores and no one was interested in providing us with 800 heads of lettuce, nobody at all, and thousands of toilet roll, and it just nobody was, everybody kind of looked at us, they were like, no. You don't want $50,000 of business all in 1 month that you didn't have before? They're like, no. It was very disheartening, right? So we're like, okay, well, we don't know where the last $10,000 is going to come from, but we're going to do this anyways. We had already started advertising. Well, we ended up inadvertently raising about $40,000, where we only had intended to raise 20. So we ended up doing this grocery thing in January and then doing it again in March or April, I can't remember. Basically, we ended up doing it every 2 months, every second month for the rest of the year to use up the money. And then people would go and buy the groceries for these people and refuse to get reimbursed. The model was, you go buy the groceries, bring your box. We have another team on site that's delivering, and while they're delivering, you bring your receipts and the church will reimburse you, right? But people were refusing to get reimbursed, so it's it became the 5 loaves and 2 fish. We can't get rid of this money, when the whole problem at the beginning was, God, where are you gonna get food from? God, have you counted these people that want to eat meat? There's 600,000 of them, plus women and children. And God is saying to us, has the arm of the Lord been shortened? So never be shy, never be afraid. And this goes to show you that all of this is coming from tiredness. Honestly, I think maybe I'm projecting this on you, right? But in the last 3 or 4 years, this is gonna sound so carnal and so base, and so I've really prioritized my sleep. I've really realized I get tired, and then I get tired, and then I get all my priorities wrong, and then I start to stick my problems between me and God, and then I get dry and lose my joy and this and that, and then I also don't have, when somebody's tired and they're worn out and they're just barely keeping the ship afloat, they don't have strength and energy to dream and to believe that, $30,000 is just going to come out of nowhere. Volunteers are just going to appear out of nowhere. Honestly, we had more volunteers, because this was during the pandemic. There was nowhere to go, nothing to do. The only thing that was open was grocery stores. People were begging us to get a grocery list so they could go grocery shopping for people. We had more people to help than we had people that needed the help, And people to this day are sending messages and they're like, are you still doing that grocery thing? Honestly, we pooped out. There's still some money left over, but we're just directing our energy elsewhere, right? And God is great. God is great. So honestly, I don't know, maybe a subsidiary message, an asterisk for tonight is, maybe ask yourself, what makes you get tired? And ask yourself if it really has to be that way. Some people only sleep 3 or 4 hours a night, and really, there's no other way that their life could be arranged. terrible for them. But I have a lot more joy and creativity, and I'm more whimsical, and you know what? Mary noticed it. She says, first thing to go is I lose that little bit of my naughtiness. You know, I'm always a little naughty. I'm always poking a little bit of fun, and I lose that when I get tired. So don't let yourself get tired. And the last thing I'll share with you, right, is in Ephesians 3:22. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think, according to the power that works in us. I might have shared this with you guys last time, but I can't help but share it with you again. Like, what is the outer boundary of your imagination? Close your eyes for a minute now and just imagine with all your heart, what is the greatest glory of God you could imagine being revealed here in the city of London? A church on every corner, people stopping to praise God in the street, people loving each other and serving each other, you know, in the tube or in the street, caring for the homeless. What is the greatest glory of God? If when you pray and you say, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, in your wildest imagination, what does that look like here in the city of London? You know what God's answer to your wildest imagination is? That's it. Just wait, let me show you what I have.